welcome to the class. We are going to find out about, with the ADAS approach, how is income determined in the short run. But before that, I want you to know the shape of the aggregate demand curve. See, we've already done consumption. We showed you saw that we have what is known as the autonomous consumption. It starts from there, and then it takes on from autonomous. It goes on to induce. That means then it changes with the income. So we will, it's an upward sloping curve. And then you also saw that the investment curve, which is absolutely autonomous. There's nothing, no induced there. It is just decided this will be the investment, and so it is. So here, if you look at these curves, you'll come to know. And AD, then what would AD be? AD would be C plus I. Remember that we did these two aggregates when we were doing aggregate demand. They said there are only two components in this: the household consumption demand and the firms. So this is how it's going to be. So I want you to just have a look first at these diagrams. So in the first diagram, you see that consumption curve starts with the autonomous. That means that zero level of income, there is consumption. We can't do, mankind cannot live without consuming. So consumption is there at even zero level of income. And then as the income increases, your consumption increases. And of course, we all talked about saving, etc. But here we are going to do about aggregate demand is C plus I. So here then we are going to talk about investment. See, investment. So investment is autonomous investment, which is a given in the economy. So it's parallel to the x-axis. So what will the aggregate demand curve be? So it will be the consumption curve, and the distance will be of the autonomous investment, which will be added to that, and that's how you get an upward sloping aggregate demand curve. So here we are going to do now the ADAS approach to study about the short run equilibrium level of income determination. So we know that we know by now that income is determined by this approach where AD is equal to AS. So I want you to have a look and just see this diagram. So just look at the diagram and listen to what I have to say, and I'm sure it's going to be simple. So according to the, a question you can get is, how is short run equilibrium level of income determined, and use ADAS approach. So based on that, according to the ADAS approach, equilibrium income output is determined at a point where AS is equal to AD. In the short run, price level is assumed to remain constant. So there are short run changes in demand, while AS is assumed to be perfectly elastic at fixed price. So under such circumstances, equilibrium level of income is solely determined by AD. So this has been shown in the diagram. In the figure, income is shown on the x-axis, aggregate expenditure or aggregate demand on the y-axis. So AD curve intersects the 45-degree AS line at point E, where AD is equal to AS. At this point, the desired aggregate expenditure on output is equal to the desired aggregate supply. So that's what it is. So you know what? We are going to do the effective demand also. So talking about this, what is effective demand? Now effective demand, you can get a question, explain the principle of effective demand. All right, so we can just do that in the Keynesian policy. Again, it's simple because you have seen what is E, where AD is equal to AS. That's the point of effective demand. All right, so this is the point of effective demand, as you see, and this is what we'll do, where income is determined. So any point which is not there, like E1 or E2 as shown in the diagram, that's not effective demand. So quickly, in the Keynesian theory, it is assumed that the price level remains fixed or constant in the short run It is also assumed that the aggregate supply is perfectly elastic. So that is, producers are willing to supply whatever amount is demanded by the consumers at the given fixed price. So when producers are willing to supply any quantity of output to consumers, the equilibrium level of output is solely determined by aggregate demand. So we call it the principle of effective demand. So E is effective demand. So in the diagram, what do we see? We notice that income or output is shown along the x-axis, aggregate demand is shown on the y-axis. AD and ES curves represent aggregate demand and aggregate supply respectively. Now point E, that is most important. Now where is that? The point E represents effective demand. Effective demand, as at this point aggregate demand and aggregate supply equal. And any other point located on the AD curve like E1, E2 are not effective. So sometimes you do get, what do you mean by effective demand? Alright, so here we are not talking about full employment equilibrium, underemployment equilibrium and things like that. We are just talking about what is effective demand. So where the point where AD is equal to AS. Alright.